Hey, this is Asteria, assisting Mr. Wiggles today, who's hosting. We're going to be discussing chapter 8.59H.
So, to start out with a chapter summary, the chapter starts out with a small scene of Cara singing for Alien Damas and Ryoka having a panic attack. This leads into Saria being on the road towards Nicia's forces with Irux. Ksmvr meets the monks of Sothheim and Nicia points the army towards Pomelet. Pisces and Myrrh decide to leave the Glass Straits and start raiding slave caravans on the way to Pomelet. Next, we come to Yvlon, who finds a friend in Yisame and goes to the great sage Etrika to get her relics identified. The sage thinks something's wrong with her arms and has Yvlon do tests with metal while telling her one of her rings is beneficial and one is detrimental, and the scrolls need to be opened and activated to be used. As they're leaving the room, a plague beetle detaches from the metal, but Etrika planned for it, and they discover the plague is affecting Yvlon. Etrika hears her and tells Yisame they are in trouble. To close out the chapter, Yvlon and Saria tell their respective parties about Erin and try to enlist their help. Etrika, Irux, and the Siren all agree to look into it, and we come to the end of the chapter where Geneva discovers the missing link for Erin's cure. That's the summary for the chapter, and now we'll just do some chapter thoughts. So my thoughts were overall it was a good chapter. Nice character moments between Yvlon and Yisame. I also enjoyed that Yvlon was able to get her condition cured, though Yisame just received another political bomb. We'll see how she handles it, but Nerhavia isn't in great straits right now, politically speaking. What with the wars they're going through, and now they have a plague that they need to deal with, and the whole Dejini incident. Information on modern day sages and monks was fascinating. Really liked that. There were quite a few discussion questions on monks, but my overall thoughts on them are they're a very unique class archetype that has a lot of potential paths to it. The chapter ending and the horns refocusing on Erin's plight really brings home for me that the volume is ending. Everything feels like it's going to a climax, and next chapter, I believe, we'll see some form of Horns reunion, honestly. Then there's that ending, that cliffhanger ending. And it just really made me want the next chapter in the off chance that Geneva will say what she knows. I think it's a low chance it'll happen in the next chapter, but I really, really need to know. All right, that's my thoughts. Anyone else with their thoughts on the chapter?
Looks like both people coming in. So I'll just briefly share mine while we're waiting for them to finish up. I enjoyed the continuity of this chapter. There's a lot of little details that kind of came up from chapters way back when we first met certain characters that got extra detail that I really enjoyed. I think it felt more to me like a rush chapter because we just sort of have to get moving on the horns reuniting, try to hopefully do this before the end of the volume. So I think some of these scenes would have been better if they'd had a couple more chapters to be more fleshed out. But there definitely were some funny moments, and just like I said, the continuity detail for me really stood out. But the chapter did feel rushed.
What scenes, in your opinion, were the rushed ones?
Just sort of overall, like the relationship between Queen Yisame and Yvlon, right? That feels like that should have had more time to develop a little bit. It feels like the fight between the Scorpion and the Crazy Vizier should have maybe been a little bit longer, and we should have had more time to kind of get to know the monk. And just each section of the horns felt like it kind of should have been its own chapter. But like I said, we are where we are. We need to get our reuniting going on. But overall enjoyable. Just felt it could have been fleshed out a bit more.
I do agree it could have been each separate chapters, but just imagining how many chapters that is it's a huge amount, right?
It's a dream.
But, so we have one reaction now from Mr. Europe who says it was a really nice chapter. It feels like almost every other chapter completely changes what I'm expecting for the end of the volume. At this point, I'm just going to sit back and enjoy the ride. Also, Ren said that Pirate is definitely going to make us wait over their end of year break for the full Geneva reveal. Which, I definitely agree with, but I hope it's not the case. I want to
Your
know.
cliffhanger.
I want to know. All right.
Your cliffhanger is not getting resolved anytime soon.
Nope. All right. I think those were all the thoughts we're going to get for the overall chapter. So let's just go into it with our topic / questions for the chapter. So we began with the Cara segment. A Cara and Ryoka segment where, Cara was singing for Alien Damas. And first question is, why do you think Cara has come to Alien Damas? Do you think she trusts Ryoka or possibly thinks she's on Alien Damas's side? And the quote here from the chapter is, she'd seen Ryoka on Israel. Now she was here. Why? Why Alien Damas? Well, the location was answer enough. I personally think that Cara has come to Alien Damas to meet Ryoka, like, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I suspect that Cara knows that Ryoka got kidnapped somehow and may not know that Ryoka's already out of that particular briar patch. So it might be interesting to see if she attempts an unnecessary escape attempt.
Yep. And that was Action Kermit speaking. Next up is Pat, if you want to go.
Yeah, just a reminder. It did say that she was here for Sarah at the end of her segment. The princess who's stuck in the weird time siege.
Yeah.
So that's why she's there.
Yeah, she definitely seemed to connect Alien Damas to Seraphel, and it's really interesting to know what her connection is. Like, we know that what do we know? That there were that Seraphel and Cara had a previous connection before, but we don't know what happened. And so it seems that Alien Damas was the major instigator, but we'll have to see with Gravesong in the future.
You guys don't think she's there for Batman as well? Just to rescue her friend? Because I thought she was there mostly to confront Batman after that phone text exchange all the way back in volume 3.
Yeah, I definitely think Batman is a major reason, but Seraphel probably is a reason as well.
Courier says that Ryoka showing up in Alien Damas in the country is interesting, as Cara was struck in a blockade city due to the country before Tyrion. And I should probably be reading these out loud, but the crew blew that up. So good question of how she got there so quickly.
Nobody, I think you wanted to speak next, or you had something you wanted to say?
You say she's there to save Seraphela, but isn't Seraphela is still in the fort under siege?
She is still in the fort under siege. Pat, did you want to respond to that, or?
Sure. Well, I did put it in the chat. She was so good that no one even suspected how much she hated this kingdom. Cara raised her head and thought of her friend trapped under siege, worried she would never save for the connection they would bring, her friend and a place, 2 places, etc. Cara looked up and held them in her chest until she did what she had come here to do. And then she says, Seraphel. So, it's pretty explicit, I think.
Yeah, I think there definitely is some connection between why she's there and Seraphel. But at the same time, it could just be that she's thinking of how much she hates Alien Damas, and she's just keeping that close to the chest to, make sure she doesn't sympathize too much with their leadership. Any other thoughts on this question?
I think it'll be interesting to see what Cara does, but I think your interpretation there at the end, Wiggles, makes sense to me. I think she's primarily there to confront and deal with Ryoka, and she's just reminding herself, Seraphil is just to keep her in mind when she's dealing with Aladamas and not get sucked into the place.
Yeah. All right, well, I'm going to move on to the next question now. If you have any more thoughts on this particular question, just at me with it. Why, out of all of her classes, do you think Cara hides thespian? And I think it's just because if people knew that she was an actor rather than a real pop star, they would question her a lot more. It's all a part of making sure the public sees her in a certain light. And if they knew that she was also a thespian as well as a pop star, she would not be trusted as much in a way. And then Bismir says that it's pretty obvious she needs to be a good liar. Without people knowing she is capable of lying or acting might be better, yeah.
Yeah, Cara seems to be big into doing like 4-dimensional social chess. And, people might not actually think it's a big deal if they find out she's a thespian, but, Cara, for her own reasons, wants to keep that hidden as an hidden ace because she knows that the mob is fickle. She's popular now. She could be hated later at some point. And when that happens, she needs to disappear.
No. How does the thespian class help her disappear?
Because she can pretend to be a huge range of people. It doesn't necessarily need to be like an espionage related class, but it is, it's right on the edge. It's like a dual use class, you might think, if you develop it the right way. And I think Kara's probably putting in the extra effort to, make it possible to do disguises and things that would make her harder to track.
Yeah, I can see that. Like, as long as she has that class up her sleeve and no one knows about it, she can go places dressed, as anyone, and they would never suspect her of being there. So as long as she has that little ace in the hole, people won't know that she's capable of that.
Like, give her away? I mean, I doubt there's like a million other pop stars out there.
Well, yeah, but if they knew that she had an actor class, if they knew that, she was a thespian, she couldn't she couldn't go other places and like be trusted as much because maybe people will think she's just an actor. She's only putting up an act being a pop star. Anyway, that's my read on it.
Yeah, I kind of thought it was more to sort of have people underestimate her, right? Initially, like already, like if people only think she's a singer, then it's like, oh, you're just a singer, whatever. So maybe there's something about the thespian class that it as soon as people see it, they're like, oh, you're a thespian, and there's just something about it we don't quite know.
Yeah. Bismir, did you want to speak? Are you speaking, Bismir? If you are, we can't hear you. Never mind. Okay. I think Mr. Europe is typing out a response. Oh, here we go. Mr. Europe says, sounding sincere when singing the anthem is a lot more impressive and emotional when you don't know they have a fake emotions type skill. So basically, if people knew she was an actor / thespian, they would know that, her singing very emotionally just might not be a real thing because she could be faking it with skills. I'm going to move on to the next question now. And that deals with Ksmvr, and this is the whole Ksmvr monks Nisia segment. The first question / topic here is, Shireen the abbot mentioned the monks took 4 vows, 2 of which were a vow of poverty and a vow of privation. What do you think the other 2 vows might be? And to add on to this, I think the lesser endurance and lesser toughness skills are associated with poverty and privation. No idea which is which, but those 2 skills I feel are likely associated with those 2 vows. So what vows do you think would go well with lesser strength and lesser dexterity? And my initial thoughts, just to give you guys time to type or whatever, my initial thoughts were something like a vow of obedience to, the monk's hierarchy, something like that.
Mhm.
Or maybe a vow of no stealing just to get lesser dexterity. I don't know. Like, there are a lot of vows you could come up with that would give you a lot of different things. And I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, so I know the Benedictines had stability, fidelity, the monastic way of life. Chastity obviously isn't one that the Sothine monks do.
Yeah.
But there used to be like requirements that you would have to do a certain amount of manual labor each day, and I think some monastic communities even still do that. So I could see that being a requirement that gives them the strength skill, is like requiring them to do a certain amount of physical work every day.
Yeah, that makes sense. What would you call that though? Like a vow of work ethic? I don't know.
Let's see, I'm trying to dig it up from different pages, and people keep telling me to download PDFs and shit. That's not it. I want to say that's stability or conversion or something like that, but yeah, I'll have to dig that out more.
Okay. Bismir says a vow of not ignoring injustice. That would actually be a pretty good vow, just like a vow of justice. It would be really difficult to do well, but I think that could be one of them. Maybe.
Means Wisteria becomes relevant again.
Exactly.
Justice Crusade.
Exactly.
You're the new witch of the era, and then we never heard from her again.
Now, Mr. Europe had a thought of a vow of community service. DM Craft had a vow of not owning property, which, goes well with a vow of poverty or and such. Ren says a vow of perseverance or diligence. See, there are just so many different options too. Rosie says there's a vow of truth and traditions, but I don't think it fits with the skills we have here. Bismir says maybe the poetic way to put it in terms of a vow of not ignoring justice would be a vow of witness. That sounds like a good vow.
A little bit. The big reveal with this chapter was that we already kind of knew that certain classes guaranteed or, meant specific skills. But this is the only class I think we've seen where it's you become whatever this monk class is and you get these 4 basic skills guaranteed no matter what. That's a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
We haven't really seen that anywhere else.
I absolutely agree with you. It's that leads right into our next question we have here, which is monks are extremely unique classes in how they're described and functioned. Their skills evolve over time on a set path. But do you think there is differentiation based on the person, or do all of these monks follow the exact same path and how their skills will evolve?
Speaking for myself, I would suspect that there's probably stuff for individuals, like when Calru's got that patient acceptance skill from his prisoner class. That just sounds like such a logical thing for a monk to develop at some point if they're just spending long periods in silent contemplation. That I can't imagine that a monk wouldn't get it at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. I tend to agree with that interpretation that their base skills are all set, but as they grow, their evolutions of their skills are going to be different. Rosie, you had something you wanted to say?
I both agree and disagree. I think maybe there are some individuals, individual skills, like you said, of that thought one, that's maybe a monk that does a bit more contemplation, but the whole base of monastery traditions was often in routine. It was in such severe dedication and devotion to a cause that's your entire being is for that cause or that way of life. And I think that in itself would lend to meaning that people develop the same skills, maybe at different rates. Maybe they get one skill before another, kind of flip-flopping them. But I think ultimately you would have just a range of skills that pretty much everyone ends up with by the time they're at, not obviously the avid level because he's the head, but close to that. And I think there is maybe some wiggle room, but also they don't leave. He said none of them have really ever been to war. They don't really leave the monastery. So I think that too means if you're not being exposed to new situations with your skills, you're not developing new skills. You're not really developing skills outside the ones because you're not being exposed to a situation besides the same ones everyone else is being exposed to. So I would say it's yes and no.
That's a good answer. I could definitely see something like a monastic order would almost always develop along the same skills, whereas more individualized monks might just have their own skills develop. Here's some comments I haven't read yet. Shiloh Moon said that classic vows are obedience and stability. Courier said that monks seem to be really good at training for skills on top of what other minor variants you get and how vows may represent themselves. So on top of vows allowing easy, unique skills, they have a great training program for dexterity, strength, weapons, etc. Go ahead, Action Kermit.
Yes. One other thing to bear in mind is that Benedictine-style monks who live in monasteries are only one type of tradition. You also have friars who are, wandering monks who will go out into the world and, like the Dominicans especially were famous for doing this during the Protestant Reformation. They'll go out and argue with people about their beliefs. And, that's one of their core functions is to stand up for what their creed says in public in front of, ordinary people.
Yeah. And there is also East Asian type of monastic orders like Buddhism, that type of deal. So there are a ton of different monk histories that you can draw from to make your monks very unique. DM Craft said, I feel like these monks practice getting skills, not via level up. I think that's really an interesting thing that you could see is a class that mostly gets skills from practicing rather than just from leveling up. That would be really fascinating if that was the case.
Just remember,
then,
guys, like in the chapter, it did say that fighting one monk was like fighting all the rest of them, right? They might have more intense skills than another, but they all, I don't know, that seemed to imply to me they all had the same skills. It
yeah,
kind
it
of
does
sounds
imply
like,
that, yeah.
yeah, like you have this, you're this kind of monk, like you're this kind of fighter, which, I don't know, it's interesting. It's almost like they're a hive.
Yeah, but keep in mind that they did imply that a lot of the monks, the current ones, are very new. So it could just be saying that, because they're all new right now, and they're also, maybe not low level, but just lower leveled, that they all are very similar in the skills they have right now. Mr. Europe says, no way that all their skills are identical. They might only have minor individual skills, but everyone having the exact same skills sounds closer to a hive mind, like you said, Asteria. A monk who gets more zen/enjoyment out of sweeping would get different skills from a monk who gets it from raking. And yeah, I can see that definitely being the case because, every class we've seen so far, I don't think we've seen a single example of classes like a monk that are said to have very distinct skills that always happen here, here, and here.
I feel that the entire scene is just something that is very, very badly explained. Like it leaves a lot of holes with how much emphasis it puts. Like, and everyone has the same skills, 4 vows, 4 skills. It's it feels like it leaves many, many holes that are illogical from what we know of the system. And like, if you only get skills if you get an equal vow, it just doesn't really seem to work out. I do hope that Pirate fixes that at some point. Maybe need to point it out.
I do think they'll expand on it more. I don't think like you only get the 4 skills from the vows. I think those are like the first ones, but as it evolves, you get more and more. Bismir says goes with this East Asian idea of kung fu, which means repeated practice or something like that, instead of repeatedly facing worse challenges. Rosie says, yeah, and I think the Sothheim monks aren't the type to go out. That's what was implied to me. But I totally agree there's differences across traditions. Mr. Europe says it could just be the core of the class that's described right now, and we'll get more in the future. All right. We've spent quite a bit of time on this already, so let's move on to the next question, which is any idea who, or here, I'll move this a little later because we're still on monks for a lot of these questions. Next monk related question is why might drakes make poor monks? Is it simply bias, or does it have something to do with the drake's role against the dead gods and faith-based classes in general? We have a response here already for this, which was from Action Kermit, and he says, or they say, I would be interested in hearing about the exceptions to that rule. Drakes are roughly analogous to ancient Romans, and Saint Benedict, who founded the Benedictine monastic tradition, was a Roman from a noble senatorial family who became disillusioned by aristocratic life and decided to pursue a life of asceticism instead. Saint Anthony of Egypt, sometimes called the father of all monks, was also from a wealthy landowner background before he renounced worldly ways. Go ahead, Action Kermit, and then Asteria.
Yeah, so the parallel between Drakes and ancient Romans is not perfect. I see some pretty clear inspiration there with their heavy emphasis on legalism and military culture and, organized troop forces and things like that. That's reminiscent to me, but, their technology level and their military doctrine is different, certainly. So, yeah, it's really interesting to me like that, though, because there are, people who were high-level aristocrats in Roman society who, sort of act like people from the walled cities who just got completely fed up with it. And, they went out into the desert, or like St. Augustine ended up becoming a bishop, just throwing away, the kind of life that, you would, a Drake would consider to be the good life, and then they go off to be monks instead for whatever reason. So, I could see a Drake somewhere, making that choice. And, that would be a sort of an interesting way of adapting their personality to that lifestyle, which is a very different one.
Yeah, it would be sort of like a very individualistic, very rebellious kind of action from a Drake in Drake society to go with a monastic lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. Or even just going into the desert like the Desert Fathers did.
Yeah. Asteria, did you want to say something?
Yeah, Alabaster contributes that Drakes are inherently selfish, which is what you guys were saying, right? Horrible giving things up to the point they literally have a point during puberty where they obsessively steal, little kleptomaniacs. It would be almost impossible for most Drakes to give something up important to them. Even Oslam couldn't stand giving food, right, to Erin. And echoing off that point, I think that would make for a pretty friggin' super monk, right? If you have inherent biases built in against a class's like top priorities, if you can overcome those or resist those temptations or like inherent things in your biology, like if we were to see a Drake monk, I wonder if they would just be like super high level very quickly. Like they'd be able to level.
That's a recipe for counter leveling.
Gotcha.
Yeah, exactly. So like a Drake would just be a super monk much faster, but it would be so much more difficult for them. And I wonder if there are even any Drake monastic orders that exist right now. Mr. Europe says, consider Ilveris's old conversation regarding Drake society. Drakes who see things differently and those that stick out are discriminated against. Their entire military is based around fighting together rather than as individuals. I do think that, a monastic order isn't really about the individual. It's about being part of a community and taking vows as a community. So, an individual monk in their society might struggle a lot. But I think if a monastic order was developed overall and it was accepted, like it could become a really integral part of Drake society just because of how community focused it is. Courier says, I feel as if a Drake monastic order would be hooked into what's left of the dragons. Either for or against, I can't really say. It easily works for both. Alabaster says that if they had the willpower, yeah, they'd be awesome, but most wouldn't. And even if one did, since monasteries seem to get stronger with more members, getting a Drake-run monastery would be tough. Couldn't find enough other Drakes to get it off the ground. A Drake monk would most likely be like Sally and travel individually to other monasteries. I would definitely want to see a Drake monk. Just because now I have this picture of, someone like Sally who has just gone through life going against the grain and is super high level and is just a great monk because of it.
Do you think there also might be a Fae connection there? Like the Fae were talking about different species and their promises or whatever against the dead gods. So could the reason that they might make poor monks deal with that? Perhaps.
As in the Drakes were on the god side, so they...
No. So opposite. So like the Drakes were against the dead gods, and there's something inherent, other than the whole obsession thing, inherent about that promise about fighting against the dead gods and keeping them out of in-world that allows them or makes them poor monks. Like they just doesn't compute as a class for them.
I'm not sure if I see it that way, simply because I don't know if monks are like, well, they obviously have religious contexts in most Earth societies, but I'm not sure if they're really religious in this sense. Though maybe they are. I'm not seeing it right now that they're religious.
Yeah, Buddhism is more of a philosophy than a religion, and they have a pretty strong monastic tradition.
Mr. Europe says, a side note, do we even know if Drakes were created before the death of the gods? I would say no, we don't know that, but I'm like 90% sure they were created before the death of the gods, simply because Archeologists says that the goblins are the youngest race that matters, and we know the goblins were before the death of the gods. And so I would just say, go ahead, nobody.
If you want to go to Volume 2 type of canon, there were chapels in the old crypt, but that's Volume 2.
Yeah, but were they chapels to the gods, or were they chapels to, like some
Who
really
knows?
high level person, It's really hard to tell, and like you said, it's volume 2 with chapels. We don't know if that's, really canon at this point.
Yeah, that's why I hesitated to mention.
Yeah, it could
and
be about ancestor veneration just as easily.
yeah, like DM Craft just said, it could have just been to chapels to dragons, because like they have shown a really big desire to worship dragons. Shiloh Moon says that it might have also had to do with Deadlands. I'm not sure I see the connection to Deadlands for that. If you could expand on it, Shiloh Moon, I will read it out. Hellfire Blue says, I think monks would face huge social stigma in Drake society. A commune of social pariahs would be looked at with deep suspicion. Yeah, yeah. Any type of like thing that goes against Drake's society in general is definitely looked down upon, and would be hard for them to deal with. I just don't know if like a Drake monastic order would be completely against Drake society, or if they just want to improve it, and how that would be seen. Shiloh Moon says, in the same way that the bow and Tarandria works better if you got a living person holding it, ancestor veneration might help the dead out in the Deadlands. Well, that's a good point. Like, help make them stronger. Yeah, I could see that. Though maybe that's why dragons are so powerful in the Deadlands as well. It's just because of they still have drakes venerating them in a lot of ways. All right. Yes, the Bow Country was evil. Let's move on to the next question, which is, involving faith as well. Is this quote, I hope for more, but so long as Sothheim lives, we will grow. Time will tell if what we believe is right. Is that quote an indication that faith is on the rise everywhere? Will we start to see more of these class types popping up? I'm just not sure if monks in general are a faith type class in the same way as something like a pilgrim or an acolyte or a priest is. So I'm not sure if it's an indication that faith is on the rise, but if anyone else has any other thoughts, give them in the reaction. Bismir says that I think it's a response to Sothheim being pretty into making babies. Pirate also distinguishes between belief and faith, which is a distinction made in some earth religions too.
Okay, but here's the whole issue with the making babies part. Unless these monks are looking like 20, 30 years in advance, it takes time to have the kid, raise the kid, and get them to a point where they're actually contributing to the whole monk order, and there's no guarantee that the kids are actually going to become monks. So do we think the monks have some sort of like secret get older really quickly kind of thing going on? Or I'd be more inclined to think that this is more of a nod to the gods are rising, which means faith is on the increase. I think we're going to start to see an increase in these religious classes making a comeback.
Actually, Kermit, did you have a response to that?
No, I just the mental image of having a skill that made kids instantly grow up is a little bit wild.
Yeah, that's a fun skill right there. Rosie or Bismir, you had a response you wanted to Asteria? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think the thing is that the abbot mentions that it's a long time game that they're playing, not like a short-term thing. And so growing society through babies rather than recruits was a thing that is a thing that is important to them. And that's one of the things I think that was mentioned in the chapter, that's how they plan on growing in the long term. And that's why as long as there's like one monk place, there will be more in the future.
Absolutely. Rosie, you had something you wanted to say next?
Try to quickly collect in response to all of that. Basically, belief and faith are completely different things. I personally think that it is because there's a common association in our English lexicon is the problem, but they are very different. You can believe in something and have it not be holy. And secondly, I also think that Sondheim's whole statement about whether we'll be right, I think that's more about their philosophy, this idea that they think the root of evil is money, it's greed, and that part of the reason they maybe don't take the vow of celibacy is they don't think that sex and children are inherently bad, that that's not an inherent part of the evils of society. And that for them, the whole idea of growing this order and seeing whether they will be right is whether showing that giving up money, giving up personal gain in order to live in harmony, is the right decision, is that as more people do it and see them, and maybe that will bring peace. And that's what I think they mean by perhaps someday we will be shown if we are right. It's the same as people who say capitalism's great. And, if we ever became socialist and all that blah, 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 things would fall apart. They're basically on the other end. They're saying the root of the problem is money. And so maybe if we get at that and we show them we can do without it, things will be great. That's kind of how I see it.
Ren says, I think there could be a faith variant on a monk, but monks aren't inherently faith classes. Nobody says their recent peak was during Floss Rule, which was before God's return. So that's an indication that it isn't really to do with faith being on the rise, but more just monks in themselves rising up. Shiley Moon says, ideologies spread really quickly all the time. Being better known will help Sondheim expand because it is basically advertising. Bismir says, belief also involves some degree of evidence, while faith is more about going on with even without evidence. All right, let's move on to the next question, which is, what do you think of Ksmvr's interest in the monk class? Do you think he wants to learn more about Pawn's class or become Sondheim? I'm not sure what the question means in terms of become Sondheim, but I do think Ksmvr really sees potential in these kinds of vows for the Antinium in general because they already do a lot of these kinds of things. They already are basically under a vow of poverty. They're already under a vow of privation. So, it won't level them up quickly, but it can give them a very easy boost to their strength if they were to take this class and take these vows. Obviously a vow of celibacy would work perfectly well for most Antinium, which, I have no other thoughts on. Hellfire Blue says that's a broken build. Bismir says Antinium are like the opposite of Drakes. They're natural born monks. DM Craft says soldier ants are already level 10 by default. This is such a good addition to them. And just a minute, or go ahead, Asteria.
I'm just going to throw in here that the whole slang from Siri about just monking about takes on a whole new meaning. The latest chapter.
It really shows, actually, that's a really good point because all we have from Sire is, a bunch of negativity about monking about. So that actually does show the Drakes really don't have a good opinion of monks. Whereas these monks, they're not monking about, they're living off the land, and that's just something that Drakes don't see as well. Shiloh Moon says, I don't know if Antinium would benefit from it since they already are having ant times. It's not really overcoming temptation if you're already a sexless ant person. And yes, absolutely. It would be definitely harder to level as, but if the vows themselves just give you the class and they give you the skill right off the bat, it'd be interesting to know if, the Antinium can somehow game the system a little and just give their low level soldiers, lesser strength, lesser endurance, lesser dexterity, all of that. That'd be really interesting to see.
I like how you guys keep saying sexless ants, and they're like the only species that has written a sex guide, as Ksmvr actually did reference this chapter. Just as a reminder, Anyway, Rosie's
Yes.
up.
All right, Rosie, yeah, go ahead.
So I have two theories. The first is that yes, Ksmvr is thinking of maybe the ants, but I don't think it would work the way he thinks it is. I think it would probably be some of Pawn's followers who decide that giving up the sky and some of these things to help the hive so that all can enjoy in it is worth it. I think that would maybe be the only way monks could work for ants, because I think it does have to involve some kind of conviction and sacrifice, in the same way we were saying that a drake would be a super monk because they have all these inbred, issues of greed. I don't think an ant could be a monk unless they'd experienced the world and grown some of their own desires. On the flip side, my other theory is that Ksmvr is going to become a monk, and it's going to have to do with his dedication to the team, maybe actually disavowing the hive and saying that this is my purpose. Because at the core of it, that really seems what the monk class is about discovering and dedicating yourself to a purpose. And there's all these orders, but there's nothing to say he can't just decide my vows are to my team, these are my vows, because he seems like very uncomfortable with everyone saying he has to become this individual. And I feel like what it's leaning into is eventually going to be him saying, no, who I am as an individual is these vows I've made to my team, and becoming a monk.
If there's one thing that I think Pirateaba will never do, it's something as easily gameable as like a monk class being applicable to every single one of the soldier ants. So I do agree that in many ways, I don't think the Antinian would benefit as long as they're, still not individuals. Like if you just gave all these faceless drones who don't have an individual bone in their body this class, they're not going to benefit from it because it's too simple of a upgrade to them, and the system as it is doesn't really give out that kind of power without any return. Shiloh Moon says, if you're Baroque, do you benefit from a vow of poverty? Could you swear a bunch of vows before a battle and then break them all after? And that ties into what I just said. I don't think the Pirateaba would write the system like that into being breakable in such an obviously meta way. But I could be wrong. That could be where it could go. Asteria says probably could, but I wonder if you lose out on all your levels and classes if you break your vows. Action Kermit says mendicant friar class obtained. I'm not sure what that class
All right,
is.
I meant to post that in general. So yeah, I was just thinking about Ksmvr's possible class progression, like you were just suggesting, that he could become a monk dedicated to his team. And a mendicant friar is a member of a monastic order that embraces travel as opposed to being stable in one place. So, like the Benedictine order would have just stuck around the same monastery for basically their whole time as a monk, as opposed to going out and seeing the world. So, even the etymology of the word friar is like a brother, right? So, if Ksmvr decides he's going to be like the brother of his team and he's going to wander around and be an adventurer, if he wanted to pursue being a monk, he could think of worse ideas.
Absolutely. I do think that would be an interesting way to go for Ksmvr as a monk class. That would it would honestly complement him a lot, just with how he's a skirmisher, and monk basically just gives you a bunch of passive benefits, it seems. Bismir said, the whole thing around vows is complicated by the fact that making vow of XYZ actually seems to help you keep that vow. An example, the abbot mentions they can't pick up money, it would slip through their hands, and only if they put in some effort into picking up money does their class seem to become endangered. So the vow stuff doesn't seem to be linked to willpower so much. So the Antinium don't need to be fighting temptation constantly for the vows to have value. Let's move on to the last monk-related question. Can non-monks take vows to gain similar skills?
One thing that is kind of interesting is Geneva Scala did her whole Hippocratic Oath thing to become a doctor. So I don't know if that counts as a vow in quite the same way. It doesn't seem to grant a skill immediately, but it does seem to unlock a whole bunch of paths that other people would find much harder to get.
Yeah. My thought would be that, we already see non-monk classes having issues with their vows being unfulfilled and like losing the class. Like, say a knight or a princess, they can both lose their classes if their vows, what have you, aren't fulfilled. But I think that's more of a not like it's more of a innate thing rather than something where the vow itself gives you power. I think the vow itself makes it a monk type of class. Maybe there are other regional varieties of monk, but I think the vows are a monk specific type of thing. Right? I'm not seeing any other ideas or responses to that question, so we'll move on to the last question for the Ksmvr segment. Any ideas who Takir's allies are that on their way to join the fight, as mentioned by the abbot? And I have no idea. I don't think we've seen any mention of any allies coming to join Takir, but I'm trying to think of anything like that. And Bismir says that isn't it Pomley? But go ahead, Asteria.
The Druids.
The Druids?
Yeah, I was going to suggest that too.
Huh. I wouldn't actually. Well, yeah, that makes a lot of sense now that I think of it, because Takir had a huge population of druids, and we haven't heard basically anything from them. So yeah, that's a really good point. Like, druids probably are the allies that are coming on the way. Any other thoughts for this question?
Said maybe it's Pomale.
I think Pomley is like stuck where they are, so I wouldn't really consider them to be on their way in the grand scheme of things.
Kind of funny that like what started Nisa, is it? Nisa's whole like loss of her empire and throne started in Pomale, and now they're all headed back to the same place where it got started.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's all come full circle.
Yeah, but in terms of allies, I mean, maybe Floss will rally. I guess the Druids. I was trying to think of who else. Maybe the animals, like the critters, are going to come back. But
yeah, that could be part of the Druids as well.
Elephants show up again.
Yeah. Courier says, I'm curious about Pomlay's origins and what the last mass battle where they were formed was fought for, because it looks like it might be happening again. Bismir says undead great elephants, Pisces is in the region. That'd be scary. That'd be a scary thing to have charging at you. Rhythm and Bruise, Descanter, you would like to speak?
Yep. So we're saying on the thing about the allies, it seemed to say that their allies were in Pomley because a lot of their people were there, but not necessarily Pomley themselves was the thing. And they could be the druids, could be that there are druids there, but it sounded like there were a bunch of Teeker's people that were in Pomley, and those are the people that she's going to try to get.
Okay, I could see that interpretation too.
And I'm going that because she goes, place where they go, because she says they're going to Pomley when talking about their allies. So it seems to have something to do with them. But that was my theory.
All right. Let's move on from the monk segment, which took up quite a bit of time. We really had a lot of monk questions. But let's move on to Yvlon, Yisame, and Etrika the Sage. Any theories behind what the rings do now that we know one is beneficial and one is detrimental? And doesn't necessarily mean detrimental to the user. It just means it's a detrimental effect. So I think the beneficial one could be some kind of purification, as in anti-poison, curse kind of ring, whereas the other is some form of projectile like Pissy's Shatterbone thing, but much more powerful. Or not Shatterbone, Shatter something. Shatter Spell? I don't know.
Shatterbolt.
Shatterbolt, that's it.
Let's see. The sage seemed to have pretty heavily implied that the detrimental ring was, taken from the hide of some kind of creature like a wyvern or something. So it's, you would think of a hide as being something that would provide defense. So I'm not sure what kind of weird twist on it the putrid one must have had in mind with that particular artifact.
Well,
think about dead bodies that we've seen. What would be a totally epic dead body shrunken down to make a relic class ring? Is anything
One
coming
thing-
to mind?
Target.
Was
Oh,
that
what?
Dvorak?
Dragon.
A dragon
Yes.
or a worm?
Worm.
Oh my gosh. Yes, a worm.
That
That'd
would
be
make a pretty
huge.
epic class ring and shrunken down, and it would be malevolent as like fuck. So, you know, I
Yeah.
can see that.
One response to Action Kermit is that these rings were from the adventure, not from the Putrid Run one. They were off of the adventures, one of the adventurers' bodies.
Gotcha.
Or no, are they from Tandria or Belarus?
Belarus.
That's okay. Worms could be there too.
Courier says, I still want one ring to sap a skill and project it to the other ring, but that's looking unlikely. The ring's materials are so different. And the monster parts one is supposedly an entire hide shrunken down and wrapped into a ring. That could be anything, like a dragon, Bismir says, or an Ouroboros worm shrunk at scale, DM Crash says. And yeah, I hesitate to think it's either a dragon or a worm right now, because that would be like the top end of what a ring could be. And I don't know if it's that powerful. Because if you think of a whole entire dragon hide all condensed down, or a whole entire worm hide condensed down to one ring, you'd have a really strong ring right there. Rosie says maybe a sea serpent or a kraken. And Courier says it's probably on the scale of like a wyvern, maybe a wyvern lord or a Kreller. That would be a really cool ring to have, a Kreller ring that's like anti-magic and just protects you against magic in all forms. Basically, Gazi's armor in a ring form.
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead,
thought
Action.
that Kreller hides in pretty much anything that are related to them. If you turn it into an artifact, it causes some kind of mysterious sickness.
Oh yeah. Also, these are rings from the Putrid Ones era, which was before Krellers, so it actually can't be a Kreller. Unless Krellers were experimented on before then. I don't know. I don't think it could be a Kreller because of how old it is, but Rosie says maybe a Basilisk too? That would be cool. Ren says, what if the team was involved in the death of Risveri's mom and it was made from her hide? That would be very interesting, and I think Risveri would want that ring back ASAP. Actually does bring up a good point, because they were listed as the heroes of their age, and maybe that was more than just because they killed the Putrid One. Maybe they dealt with Risveri's mom as well. All right, let's move on to the next question. Do you agree with Etrika the Sage's thoughts on how Nirhavia overly relies on the Jinni for their road infrastructure? And my thought on this question, on asking this question, was basically I saw some discussion during the stream about how people thought that Nirhavia relying on the Jinni has really set them back, but other people were saying that having good consistent road construction by the Jinni is actually invaluable, and so taking that away and instead relying on people for it would make their roads much worse in general.
I mean, if you ask me, the fact that this is like the biggest nation of string people and they're all relying on, Jinni slaves who were taken because they fought to free the string people is seriously messed up.
Yeah, that's for sure part of it. It's just, yeah, that's a whole can of worms with the whole Chandrar's continent's love of slavery. Rosie, you wanted to go?
Yeah, I think some people have mentioned this already, that it ties back into Lakin's ideas of knowledge being lost and not written down, which the sage also mentions, which somebody else mentioned, I think, in comments about Roman concrete that took us forever to rediscover. It's that it's not just the Jinni are laying roads, they're the only ones who know how to make these bricks. So what if the contracts stop forcing them to have to make the bricks? Or what if they're all free, or whatever? Suddenly no one knows how the bricks work, and so it's also that it's limiting the skills and the innovation that could happen, whether that's processing the bricks more, whether that's uplifting other villages by teaching them. It's not saying that Ginny should stop doing the roads. It's saying, hey, maybe instead of having them do it every day, one day a month, they should go to these villages and teach them how to make the bricks or teach them how to lay them. And yeah, the villages may not do it as well, but then they'll have maybe a road half as good as the Ginny roads, and we'll have all the roads in our kingdom. And I think that's really what the sage is saying.
Yeah, I do tend to agree with that. I'm someone who definitely agrees that limiting knowledge just for the sake of having like, one really good, really amazing road instead of going with the route of constructing a lot of different roads that may not be up to the same standards. I really do think that's the correct approach simply because of how long lasting that can be. And the Jinni, as we've seen, can be set free. They're not eternal. They do have issues themselves. Kylara says relying on others for knowledge is the recipe for empire collapse. If the Jinni leave/escape, things fall apart very quickly. Yeah, that's a definite point there. Asteria said the Jinn seem like a good way to lose generational knowledge and trap wealth at certain families/city states rather than have it spread out among everyone. That's another issue with it too. And Action Kermit says it's an opportunity for the archaeologist class, which would be fun to have actually see.
They just don't do archaeology. Like whenever they uncover ancient ruins and things, they always send in adventurers and then they strip it down to the bedrock and you lose all the context. If you had specialists whose whole job it was to recover ancient culture, knowledge, manufacturing techniques and so on, they'd be in a much better position. But they just like melt stuff down, whenever they get their hands on it. It's quite wasteful.
Yeah, I think Fedahep actually mentioned some kind of mage class like that, like an ancient mage. I forget what it was exactly called, but basically they're mages who seek out lost mysteries in societies and seek out lost magic that they use. And that could tie in very well with an archaeologist.
Generational knowledge and make better and better great bricks with each generation. Which is, I think, what people have really lost by relying on Ginny and stuff.
Absolutely. And that's something that, we see all throughout in-world is just societies relying on the high-leveled, and then when the high-leveled die, they're like, I guess that's it. We don't have this knowledge anymore.
I guess I'll die now.
Yeah, exactly. Hellfire Blue says, my kingdom for an archaeologist. All right, let's move on to the next question. Yisame and Yvlon
Wait.
Go ahead, sir.
Rhythm and Bruise. Say what you're going to say. Rhythm?
Oh, okay. All right. Yep, here. I was going to say the Death of Knowledge would be a fantastic addition to the death list.
That would be great too, yeah. I wonder if there was a Death of Knowledge at one point. All right, I think that's it for these questions. Or this question. Let's go on to the next. Yisame and Yvlon are friends, besties even. What were your thoughts on their interaction as they got to know each other? Did the scene strike you as in character or just a way to move the plot forward? For me, I did really enjoy the scene because it's just like it's something Yvlon has not really done yet in Chandra. It's actually making a real friend that's lasting, that who like knows her more than outside of the gladiator arena people. Like Mechtail, I think his name is. Mechtail could be considered another friend of hers, but he's more, just like an acquaintance that has helped her out. But Yisame is someone who, knows about her and wants to help her, and they really connected over that, I feel.
So I'm going to pipe up here. This is actually one of the scenes that I thought was like a little bit weaker. As much as I do love the interaction between Yisame and Yvlon, it didn't quite feel in character because I think it was one of these rush scenes where it was like, I'm going to meet this person who I've been fanning over, and obviously Yvlon feels super awkward, and Yisame is just having a internal meltdown for meeting one of her heroes. But the I know we kind of excused it with drinking too much wine and sharing of intimate details, and I understand why it was portrayed the way it was. And as much as I like the outcome, this felt like it was more of this is a convenient way to move the plot forward than a natural meeting and reaction between the characters as we've seen them so far.
I can see that. It's just like, as DM Craft just mentioned, Yvlon was uncomfortable with her family singing songs about her and artwork of her. So why is Yisame different? And so that like ties into your point, Asteria, that it might have been out of character for her, and it more could have been just to move the plot forward. Though I do think distinguishing between something your family does that you're embarrassed by, and something other people does is important, because in a lot of ways you know your family very well, and so having them like kind of sing songs about you and all that, it's kind of weird. It's a weird feeling. Descanter, you wanted to talk about something?
Yep. So on the comparison between being uncomfortable with the family songs and Same's, one of the things that made Yvlon so uncomfortable about the family is they went so out of the way to hype up everything, like, and then she went and killed this random bear for this village and wrote entire songs about it. And while Yisame seems to have a fairly encyclopedic knowledge of the Horn's history, she's actually talking about things that Yvlon has done since then that are really consequential. Raiding the Village of the Dead, pretty fantastic thing. Some of the things she's gone on adventure as well, maybe not that big, were actually good, heroic, nice adventurer things. So the scale of those things is fairly different, as well as the thing about it not being part of the family might sort of help it be less awkward.
Absolutely. Ren says because with her family, she felt like she was constantly in the shadow of her brother and sister, whereas here, Yisame didn't have that approach. Dvorak says Yvlon's parents hired a bard who embellished the events of what actually happened. As you said, Descanter, just embellishing the events really probably put her off from liking that. Rosie, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I'm trying to, again, find the words of 2 glasses of wine. So to me, it seems the way Yvlon's parents treated her achievements was, in a way, almost reducing her to them. In venerating everything she did, it was like those was all she was. And so, in a way, I think why Yisame meant so much to her and why I wish the scene was expanded was because Yisame didn't just know what she did, she knew who she was a part of. Like, she took the time to research the original horns and the original silver spears. That's words, spears.
Spears.
And I think that was meant to be that Yisame wasn't just recognizing Yvlon as having done these amazing things, like her parents say she did. She's recognizing Yvlon as a person who's had these many lives and, who's not just done things, but has lived and has had friends. And I think that's maybe what makes it different. I just think it maybe wasn't as well articulated. I saw like a kernel of that going on there. And I just wanted more, wanted it to fully pop into a beautiful golden popcorn, and it just didn't quite. But that was the vibe I was getting.
Yeah, just a little bit more characterization, a little bit more words there would have helped, is what I'm hearing. Just going into a bit more depth on why Yvlon was so different here than with her family. And I can definitely see where that's an issue with characterization, is just we know she's had an issue with this before, so why is this different? Expanding on that would have helped the scene out. We're going a little late now. It's almost an hour and a half, so I'm going to speed this up and move on to the next question real fast. Would you be excited to see more lore of the Paladin and her group as the Fox Sage researches them? How, if at all, do you think that will play a role in future events? I think we might actually get a scene with the the Paladins group in the Deadlands at some point. Maybe they survived and headed back to Belarus at some point. And so I think we could see her coming around through the Deadlands, and then we could learn more about them through the Fox Age as well.
I'll go. I'm super excited to see more of the Paladin. I love the backstory that we've only gotten hints of between her and facing off against the Putrid One. There might even be a hint of romance, perhaps, between the two. Yes. Anyway, I'm super excited. I would love to see more of this, even just more lore. But I think it will play a role in future events. We still have the pufferfish out there that the Horns have to face off of. They're, face off against their epic enemy. So any knowledge that they can get about the Putrid One and his loyal servant is going to be hopefully a sort of feather in their cap, so to speak, to face off against him.
Yeah. DM Craft says Paladin would have died. It was after Erin had fled. And I do, tend to agree with that. But it specifically showed the Sword Revenant dying, but it didn't show the Paladin dying to the gods as well. So I'm like kinda a little hopeful the Paladin managed to escape to Belarus, but we'll see. Descanter, you wanted to talk about this?
Yep, I was thinking that the Paladin surely could have died. I think it's kind of interesting that it's likely that the Paladin and the rest of her team died at vastly different points in time, since the Paladin probably didn't die until after getting woken up, whereas the rest of her team died however long ago, so they could be anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. They could still be in the Deadlands, whereas the Paladin is much less likely. You're right.
Although she was powerful enough, maybe she could have legged it after getting there and had enough time to get to somewhere safety. It's a little hard to. I wouldn't necessarily count anything out.
Yeah. Bismir says the Paladin is a minion of the gods. Yeah, I don't think that's the case, Bismir. But I'm not gonna get into Paladins not being exactly faith-based right now, because that will seriously derail this. Asteria says that's heresy.
I'm saying that if we follow the belief that the Paladin was before the death of the gods, her followers might not exist in Deathland, because we have seen no one in Deathland that came before the death of the gods. It seems that everyone in Deathlands from before the death of the gods disappeared. So who knows?
Or something happened to them,
Yeah.
We don't know what happened to them, but they're not there. So, I guess we're gonna move on from that now. And into our final segment of the chapter, the ending and any future thoughts. So, let's just start off with the cliffhanger ending right away. What is the missing piece to Erin's cure that Geneva found? One theory from Mark Tech V7 is that the final thread that Geneva figured out is Erin needs a defibrillator to get her heart pumping again after being frozen. They also, one second, I'm just gonna read the whole thing real fast. I know defibs don't actually start stopped hearts, but magical defib might not be able to. Everyone else is figuring out how to heal the poison and thaw Erin, but does in-world medical knowledge realize that the heart is basically the engine of the body? Go ahead, whoever wanted to speak.
Yeah, so my approach, or rather my speculation on it, is because specifically Geneva found this from the knowledge of the self-id minds. And, if you just unthaw a body and that's it, then you're just going to get a slab of meat, basically. So I was thinking that maybe it may require like Jalaqua to get into Erin's body as they're unfreezing it, and then Jalaqua could run the organs enough in order for them to, start properly again. Because, she would need some kind of life support in order to keep from immediately dying, like the person in Fedorhev's most recent experiments.
DM Craft agrees with you that Erin needs a self-id. And I could definitely, that is one of the better theories I've heard for it, because it's not something she would have come to on her own, but at the same time, it's really a very simple solution to getting her body going. It's just have a self-id there, put her in, and put the self-id into her body, and it'll jumpstart her living again. I know that a few other theories, I don't have any personal theories for this because it's so vague and I'm just not sure, one of the theories I saw the other night was that something stopping the bleeding from killing Erin was her thought. And I would disagree with that simply because the doctor Geneva would have thought of that, on her own, I feel, rather than needing the minds to help her figure that out. But that's another theory. Asteria says in relation to the Selfids that would break their oath, though, which is definitely true. But Shiloh Moon says they break their oaths all the time, and Hellfire Blue says it's more of a guideline rather than an oath. Yeah, it's a guideline that everyone who breaks, dies, gets hunted down, killed. Anyone else have any theories on what the missing piece is?
I mean, it could be the flames. I'm not sure how Geneva would know anything about what the flames are, but it could be something the flames provide that she's just like, oh, we need this, and then the flames do that somehow.
I just don't really know what the flames could bring to the table. It's like, unless the flames are, it could just be purely magical, and it's hard to, theorize about magical stuff without knowing, how magic works, basically. So if it's the flames, it would be hard to actually know that beforehand.
Well, but it could also be like, one thing you hear about medical mystery cures or whatever is like the person desired to come back, right? It was their willpower or whatever. So maybe she's like, oh, the patient needs to actually want to work through this or come back or something. And the flames are really good for inspiring that kind of emotion or feeling. It's a long shot. I don't know.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
I could see it. I could see it still, but it's just something that would be hard to determine beforehand. Shiloh Moon says the flames might be able to melt the ice safely. It's weird emotion magic stuff, those flames. Ren says, in relation to the selfie theory, makes the most sense with what we know so far. And yeah, I do agree that selfie theory is really strong. Descanter, you wanted to speak?
Yep. So one thing I was thinking about here is that there's a difference between missing problems and missing solutions. And for instance, things like the flames and the selfids are missing solutions and to problems. And the selfid seems to be a solution to the problem of, get the body system starting again, or keep them going while the rest of the cure comes into place. And they know they need to melt. For instance, they know they need to melt ice. So I feel like the missing piece is regarding a missing problem, because it's something that they don't know. They don't know what's wrong, so they don't even know how to go about fixing it. I think, other than the patient just dies. And so I think those are kind of the two pieces there that Geneva's looking at. Is that Geneva will find is there will be a problem that that at least the characters haven't thought of, whether or not it's one of the things that people here have said, and then there's well, what do we actually do about it to fix that?
Yeah, and that
but I have no idea which of them are.
Yeah, that can just be a case of healers versus doctors. Like these healers, they don't have the medical knowledge to really fix whatever issue could come up, whereas Geneva, she can think about what's going to happen, and she can determine this is the most likely scenario, and this is the piece that would help it out and bring it all together. Asteria says, if the missing piece is friendship, I will smite someone. It's okay, Asteria. It won't be friendship. All roads lead to Pomlay. Will next chapter be Horn's reunion in Pomlay? Partial or full? I think yes. I definitely think the next chapter is some type of Horn's reunion. We've actually had a huge arc of Horns the last few chapters in terms of, Volume 8 and how Volume 8 has been structured so far. We've had, 4 chapters in a row of pure Horns. So I definitely think it's moving towards something, and all that movement so far has been shown to be them coming together. And we just had this chapter with them all being pointed towards Pomlay one way or another. So I definitely do think that will be next chapter. Anyone else want to comment on this question?
excited for the next chapter to be horns? Or do you want it to be somewhere else? Like maybe Crusader Ants or Teslia or, I don't know, going out on a limb here, maybe Relt. Let's do a Relt check-in.
You just love Raelt, don't you? Absolutely adore him.
All horns all the time.
Yeah, this will, instead of the Wandering Inn, it'll be the Wandering Horns of Hammerod.
The horns could rescue Rael.
They could. They absolutely could. Bismir says the Horny Inn. Okay, I think we're going to go on from this question now. What is Az'kerash working on? Any ideas? We know that he had some kind of deal a few chapters ago with in 8.54H actually. He had some type of deal with Bellavir that was going wrong at the time. And if he didn't work on it immediately, then he could perish, and so could Bellavir. So that is basically our knowledge on what is happening with Az'kerash now. And now we're seeing that part of his castle is getting obliterated. So what is it? Is it some type of weird undead that they both have designed? Is it some kind of spatial type of magic that is really dangerous and neither of them is specialized in? I don't know.
The castle disappeared. Not it was obliterated, but it disappeared into a void. So
yeah.
Some sort of trans-dimensional thing, I would think.
Rosie says a portal to Earth? That would be insane. I don't know if either of them would even be capable of that, but if that's what they're working on, that would be something else. Shiley Moon says, I assume based on falling into the void, it's some kind of transportation? That could be it too, yeah. Like some kind of teleportation sequence, maybe to Fetaheb to connect with Kelt. Rosie says a portal to Deadlands. Yeah. That could be it. Discanter, you wanted to talk.
Yep. So actually not really on what they're trying to do, but on the danger of it. It sounded like that it needed his attention. It sounded like it was just going to fall through and fizzle if he didn't do anything. But it's a dangerous section, and if he messes up the actual application of it, then things might happen, like the castle getting destroyed, was at least how I read what was going on. Is the nature of the ongoing thing meant that they had to do it now or abandon it. It seemed to be more to Az'kerash's detriment if it got abandoned than Bellavir's, because Bellavir was the one who's just going, well, all right, well, you're done, and I don't help you anymore if you don't take this chance. But then Bellavir seems to be worried because Az'kerash's head isn't entirely there for this ritual, and so if he goes and does it half-assed, then and messes it up, then everything goes boom.
It definitely would be. Like I do agree with you that it's something that Az'kerash is mostly involved in rather than Bellavir at this point. Courier says, as losing an entire castle wall to the void makes me think either Deadlands or tapping into another dimension that we don't know about to power / pilot a specific undead creation. Or if it's pocket dimension fuckery, kind of like what the Village of Dead is. Again, on the topic of the portal to the Deadlands, I can see it as being, something that Bellavir knows about, but isn't like super experienced with. Like we know she has gone into the Deadlands before, and she was willing to do it to grab Erin's soul. So she could, be giving Az'kerash ways into the Deadlands so that he can make some kind of ghost undead, some kind of specter undead or wraith undead that are really rare in today's age. But also an Erin summoning ritual, as Courier says.
We know it has nothing to do with Erin. He was pairing up with Bella before Pisces asked him to do anything about summoning Erin. So it has to be something prior to that. Unless he's totally changed gears.
Yeah, that's true. All right, moving on. The next question is, will the Minotaur King be coming for the horns? They're still using the team name from Calruz, but without dispensation from the king. I think it's kind of like a grandfathered in thing. As long they were originally created by Calruz, so they had his dispensation to use the name from the beginning. So I don't think the Minotaur King is really going to come after them because of that, because they had a Minotaur in their team to begin with. So
it's a great setup for that. When they finally get out of Chandrar, they're not going back to Israel. I think they're making a Dios making a stopover in the Isle of Minos.
Detour,
And
yeah.
Detour, yes. I think that's a good setup because we haven't really been to the Isle of Minos. We're probably due there with the goblins and Ryoka, and I bet you the horns somehow end up in the middle of that mess.
That would be a great introduction to the Isle of Minos, and it's been mentioned several times now, but we haven't seen even a lick of it. We haven't seen any bit of society there. It'd be a really cool place to explore. Rosie says that or a future setup with something with Cal, something there, just not sure it's immediate. I do think eventually though it'll happen, but I feel like they'll rush back to Erin first. And Bismir replied to the Cal mention with Calruz with a silver arm. Yeah, Erin or Yvlon giving her arm over. I wonder if you can transplant one of Yvlon's arms, since apparently they just regrow. DM Craft says that would be metal. All right, crafty punster, you. All of these armies are gathering. Do you think they'll face off against each other or something bigger? Perhaps something from the Deadlands if Erin is revived in Chandra? My personal theory is that they're not going to actually fight each other at all. Like maybe they'll have some kind of skirmishes. I don't know, but I think in many ways they are being led by the horns, and the horns aren't going to fight each other no matter what happens. So maybe they'll be fighting, maybe they'll be gathered and then they'll hear about something coming up from the last tide, tying in with what Norashell did earlier, the Lost God. I don't know, but I don't think they'll fight. Rosie says it's a clusterfuck with Nurhavia breaking all weapons. Oh yeah, that would be fun. It'd be great for both the monks and the martial artists of Pomley, because they don't need those weapons really. Courier says Ksmvr will straight up drop Nisia if she gets in the way of him getting to his team. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Like all of the horns will drop everyone for their teammates. That's true. Dvorak says Actolios might be winky facing, which I'm just going to assume means it might be waking up and winking at everyone. Well, that would be pretty bad. Is Irux getting a redemption arc? Will he be a good guy at some point?
Oh, and he's going to die.
Wait, you think he's going to die, Asteria?
Yes. I don't think he's going to be a good guy. I think he's going to die. He's been set up too much as this like malevolent character with the creepy woe is me, I want someone to understand me kind of. He's just to die. I mean, come on. Like, I do think that he might end up in Naheria or whatever it is, because remember he got that sense where he's like, there are bugs somewhere. I must find the bugs. So he might go check out and hang out with the Stitch people for a while. Don't know.
I mean,
I'm done.
Go ahead, Action.
Okay, so from my perspective, I keep expecting Irux to end up with the Antinium in the Hivelands. Because, yeah, he does a whole bunch of creepy, horrible stuff to ordinary people, but what he's reaching for sounds an awful lot like what the Antinium consider normal. So, he might be able to find a productive niche for himself, as research collaborators, instead of like turning ordinary humans into bugs or whatever, just working with the bugs directly.
And Irux is heading straight towards both Nurhavia's people and Ksmvr. So both of those are very real possibilities, because if Nerhavia doesn't deal with the metal bugs by the time they get to Pomlay, and Irux is there as well, he's gonna have some nice looking metal bugs to work with, as well as Ksmvr being right there. So I can see both of those happening. I personally do not think he's going to get a redemption arc. Like, maybe he'll have some more uses in the story, but I don't know. He reminds me so much of Rikri that I just don't see him ever getting any type of redemption overall.
Yeah, I mean, like Irux and Twisted Queen would make a hell of a pairing.
Yeah, that would be real scary stuff they come up with. Courier says that Irux becoming involved with NFs, Nerhavia Fallens, or go ahead, Courier, if you want to speak.
Oh, sorry. I was thinking Irux becoming involved with Nerhavia Fallen's current plague situation as it escalates because Syria and Yvlon end up meeting up. You can pass off that connection from Syria to Yvlon and hopefully get this plague under control sooner than it would normally be imagined. And Irux, whatever, being around with the horns in general and around Remy especially is an easy lead-in to talking more about Octelius.
Yeah, absolutely. There's just so many different plot lines that seem to be coming together with the Horns reunion. There's so much different stuff we can get into as soon as they're reunited. Asteria says he also seems to be Saria's plan for the ticket off Chandrar if things go to heck instead of heck. DM says, what is stopping people just hunting Irux? I don't know. I don't think many people want to deal with him in many ways, just because he's kind of creepy. And yeah, Shiloh Moon says Irux is stopping people from hunting Irux. Asteria says he is just him, and DM Craft says he's away from the ship. But keep in mind that as we saw earlier, he can keep some of his creations in his shadow or in his cloak or whatever. So even though he's away from his ship, he still has backup, and his ship isn't that far from what we can see. It's going down rivers along paths with them. So I don't think he's super far from the ship. But one thing that when I was reading about Irux mentioning his ship a lot is I honestly think it's going to be like a what was that? The Luminary, I think it's called, coming on land. I think honestly Irux has some kind of skill that allows his ship to come on land for a time too. Oh, Shiloh Moon says it's got legs. Yeah, exactly. Insect legs. It's one big bug. Yeah, I could actually see that in some way, that the ship is mobile on land too. All right, any other reactions to this question? Okay, let's close this out with one question about Pirate. Pirate is writing on Christmas. Do we need to hold a party to thank them? Yes, no, call me maybe.
You guys didn't already send gifts? How
rude.
How rude. It's supposed to be wrapped and in the mail.
You can't prove that. You can't prove I didn't send anything.
Did you?
Yeah, let's just all
remember. Dolphy is watching.
We can all say we contributed to whoever did send something. We can just they sent something, we contributed, we helped a little.
Add your name to the thing, to the card.
I do hope that they don't push themselves on Christmas just to get a chapter out. If they're busy, it's not going to kill anyone if it's delayed a single day.
Be something short. We got teased about Relk Santa a few weeks back, so it might just be a short little check-in on Liscor.
We get Relk back at Liscor for Christmas.
Yeah, that's my guess.
That'd be fun. We haven't seen Relk in so long. Oh my gosh.
We haven't seen Liscor in forever. I mean,
yeah, but we had a chance of seeing Liscor with the Hectival side plot or side chapter.
Never got voted for.
Pretty easily.
Yeah, so I don't think we'll see Liscor for quite some time until end of volume, basically.
Liscor has been in rapid economic expansion for 3 volumes, and that's takes a while and is still happening.
Exactly.
I'm guessing that it'll be a Lascore check-in for the next chapter if we do get one on Saturday/Sunday, but we shall see.
That'd be fun.
Yeah.
That'd definitely be fun. All right. I think that wraps this up.
And that concludes today's discussion. Give a big hand for Wiggles, but hang around. We've got a song from our bard. The song is entitled Erin's Resurrection.
We have been waiting, searching for anything there. Lightning flash! Immortal beings fair from beyond where we know. Thunder roar! Secrets of dead kings and druids and tribes everywhere. Guard and wait! It all draws together, the world holds its breath and stops time. Sleep no more! Set up the chest, but leave a quiet table. Seek for her help for the eternal.